Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Lewis Beck. Welcome to the newest season of 343 TV. Now, as some of you may have realized, the name of the show has changed, and I'll address that in a moment. First of all, I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. I hope that it was relaxing and not too chaotic because the world is slowly falling apart. Anyway, so yeah, this new season of 343 TV is gonna be cool, particularly on my show, insofar as I decided to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit in terms of what I'm gonna be focusing on, and that's gonna be less about like more advanced, complex things in terms of like working with my studio and all the gear and all this production or composition stuff. And what I'm actually gonna be focusing on is each week I'm gonna focus on a concept that's really important in electronic music production and just music production in general, that I feel that would kind of empower people and educate people and give you the tools that you need to maybe make your music better like that day after watching it. And so let me just pull out my my phone so I can start monitoring the chat, and I am optimistic that I'm going to see some of you guys there who I have already seen from last year. Yeah, so beautiful. Let's see. Andrew Duke, what up? John Kingston III, the legend himself. Welcome back. Happy New Year to everyone. What's up, Enigmatic Onion? And what's up, Not Grommet? I don't know you, but I look forward to knowing you. All right, so yeah, without really any further ado, let's just hop into it. So what we're going to be talking about today is kick bass relationship. So essentially what I mean by that, right, is that every single electronic music genre, save ambient music, I would say, is going to have a kick drum, right? At least I'm going to be focusing on four on the floor styles, but even like hip hop we could talk about today as well. And the thing is that getting your low end correct is the most important part of your entire production, your entire mix. And I'll explain why that is. It's not just because you want your low end to slap. It actually is going to influence how everything else in the mix is being perceived and functioning. And so I know I keep saying the word mix, but the thing is I'm just also we can replace that with production, right? So this isn't some highfalutin mix concept, but it also at the same time sort of is, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Anyway, so let's jump right into it. All right. So what I'm going to first do actually is I'm going to talk about what kick decay time and kick release time, however you really want to talk about it or call it, are going to have a huge impact on the way you should be writing your bass lines, right? So I'm just going to go through my samples. I'm going to try to find 3 different kicks. Actually, what I'll do is I will find a kick sample and then manipulate it quite a bit. Yes, let's start with this one. This is perfect. All right. So I'm going to throw this into a instrument rack. No, sorry, what am I saying? I'm going to throw this into the simpler. And we're going to duplicate this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play a little bit with making the kick drum shorter. And we're going to talk about how that is going to influence everything that I'm going to do thereafter. That's ridiculous. All right. Wow, you can tell I haven't used Ableton in 2 days. All right. And so today I'm just going to be focusing on 4 on the floor stuff, at least at the start. We might get into more depending on how time goes. All right, so let's just look at this real quick. Now, for those of you that aren't simpler whizzes, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to use a one shot. So this is our main one. We'll call this long, right? We'll call this one medium, and we will call this one short. And so as you can probably guess, what I'm going to do is make them so they actually sound like the way they're being described. So as you can hear, right, this one is boomier, has longer release. This one is tighter. Still has a little bit of release down there, though. So the main difference, right, is that on this one we can actually hear the note, right? And on this one, a little bit harder, right? It's just kind of like a tone or texture. What's up, Nefertiti? Happy New Year. Good to see you back. And this one, let's see. There we go. Cool. So we have the same kick. Perfect. With 3 different release times. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a bass line real quick. So I'll just pull this up on, I like using Wavetable for bass lines. I find it to be a very juicy synthesizer. What up, Scott Vincent? Happy New Year. And Happy New Year to you as well, Nefertiti. I just saw that. Maybe just shave off a little bit of the attack. All right, cool. Ooh, that's loud. All right. It's all right because they're all playing at the same time because I'm a very, very smart guy. So I'm going to start with the biggest kick, right? The one with the most release time. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because, I don't know about you guys, but for a long period of time, I would start my projects by starting with a kick drum, right? And so usually when you only just have one sound, right, and you want to make a big dance track, well, you're going to kick the biggest kick drum, right? Because you're not thinking about other things. Like, I want this to sound as big as possible right now. So let's pretend that I'm in that circumstance, right? So I'm using my long kick right now. All right, so I'm going to put in a bass line, and I'm purposely going to make the bass line very, very close to the kick drum in terms of rhythm. I might even put the one of the bass notes on the kick. Yeah, I'm digging that. We'll do this. Cool. I like that. That works. Okay. So a couple things to keep in mind with what's going on right now. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just cycle through each of the kicks, okay? And we're going to see the difference in feeling and power that the track has just from hearing the different kick decay times first, right? That's the kind of big room sound, right? That's one maybe for the festival or something. It's a pretty big one too. Not quite as much boom. It doesn't really feel like we've lost a lot of power, right? Maybe in terms of size. And this is the short one. Now, just to kind of make this a little bit more fair, because I feel bad for the short one, I'm going to just quickly give it a little bit of love in the low end. And I'm going to actually use this plugin from Positive Grid called the TubeEQ, which I love. It is very non-tubey in terms of Pultec emulations, insofar as it's just kind of like is very clean, has a nice little bit of overtones, but it doesn't smear transients too much, which can be a problem with, tube gear. Oh, and I just did it on the wavetable synth, so that does nothing for me. Cool. This is perfect, actually, because now we're not going to hear so much of a difference in terms of fullness in the low end, right? So it's less release time, but that one feels just about as powerful. Maybe, do a little the old Pultec trick. Shave off a little. Cool. Yeah. All right. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, why are you doing this? So here's the kind of thing that I'm going to try to first instill to you and kind of communicate to you that is one of the biggest secrets that all of the top electronic music producers either intuitively understand or actually know and are thinking about when they're making a track, right? Especially when it comes to techno, okay? So rhythm and the perception of rhythm, right, is not just when the note is played, but it's also how the note is played. In fact, it's more importantly how the note is played. So there are two elements to how, right? There's the tonal way that it's played, right? You're either playing it soft, you're playing it hard. But the other element of how is how long the note is actually occurring for. And the reason that that's important is because if I have this really long kick drum, we're actually hearing the entire rhythm of that note lasting the entire quarter note over to the next quarter note. So it's pushing us, but we're also kind of being suspended in a certain sense, right? We're never actually stopping because it feels like it doesn't end, which can be good if you want to make a techno track that's just all about thrust, right? Let's open this short one now, though. We can feel that there's significantly more pause between the kicks, right? Let's hear that. This is just a huge big room, right? Kind of like no bullshit, almost maybe like a progressive house track. And all of a sudden, this is not quite a progressive house track, right? This is maybe like potentially a deep house track or something like that, or just a more standard house track, right? And the reason for that is very, very simply that the release time on the kick causes there to be more of a rhythmic relationship between the kick and the bass, right? And one reason for that is because the bass doesn't also have a super long release. In fact, if I even shorten the bass, right, we really feel it popping off the kick. And actually, like, it makes you want to move already. There's just rhythm already embedded really naturally in that relationship. And if I go to the long one, it's also there, but it's less like ironed in, right? Now, this is not saying that the long one is bad. It's just different, right? So the emphasis here is on the 1, 2, 3, 4 with a little bit of motion in between it, whereas the emphasis here is really more on the way that the bass is syncopating and hopping off of the kick, right? Now let's go to the medium one and see how it's doing. This is kind of, as you would expect, right in the middle of those two, right? We get some of the power and intensity of the long one, right? But we also get the kind of rhythmic benefit of using the short one. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, right, is that this already has a lot of low-end information in it. So let's take our spectrum analyzer. I'm actually going to put it on the master. And let's just look at what exists here without the kick, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the kick. Let's turn on the short one. With the bass, of course. So you can see there's this little bit that fills out in the low end. I'm glad that you can hear it, Scott. I'm glad that you can hear and feel the difference. And if anything, I'm glad that you used the word feel, because it really is feeling the difference. Yes, as I'm going to call you B, because I just can't read the Cyrillic alphabet. Anyway, so what we have in the low end here, right, is we're just getting a little bit more of that weight in the bottom, but we're not actually gaining that much up here, right? We'll see this fundamental area, these areas in between the harmonics maybe fill out a little bit, right? Because then literally that's where the kick is filling in. We actually can literally see the harmonic fill in right there, which is pretty cool. And then you'll also see, more notably, right here, fill in. So it's just giving a little bit more weight. All right, so let's now, though, go to the long kick and see how it changes the spectrum. Now, here's what's kind of interesting, right? And to be fair, this is me manipulating the frequencies because I, of course, put on an EQ to make it feel as big as that one. But you can see that the harmonics over here, when we turn on the long one, are filling out way more, right? And so here's something to just think about when you're making a track. And so this is where we're starting with, right? Is how much low-end energy is your bass line already adding? Or alternatively, how much low-end energy is your kick sucking up that's going to not have enough room for your bass line, right? So if we look at the long one, again, we can actually see that the decay compared to the short one, right? We see it actually literally dropping faster, and some of the higher harmonics amplitudes not actually going as high. I want you to keep an eye on what's going on right here. All right, so we get a little bit more in this area. Now with the medium, right, we see it come down a little bit less. And then with the short one, we get even less. Right? So one thing that happens is that the way that the musical component of the kick drum is going to be read, and by musical I just mean like harmonic, I should say, is that the longer that the kick drum lasts, the more that the upper harmonics above the fundamental will reveal themselves, right? Now that can be a good thing, right? Just depending on if you want that. And again, this is not me sitting here telling you to use shorter kicks or longer kicks or anything like that. This is actually me just trying to show you that there's actually a huge difference when you do that. And so the real difference is going to start being felt when we add more rhythmic elements, right? So we're just going to stick with this loop for now. What I'm going to first do is I'm going to add a hi-hat, because as a very famous DJ once pointed out to me, in fact, Todd Terry, the first time I ever met him prior to releasing music with him, he said to me, house music is all about coach, 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 right? It's all about the give and take, right? The push and pull. So like the clap, while it's important, that's just going to cement the groove, but it's not going to create the groove, right? So let's try to find a 909 hat. Got to be one floating around here somewhere. Maybe. Great. This is perfect, actually, because now I can show you also what the difference between the open and the closed is there, and you'll kind of see that this thing that I'm explaining about the kick drum also applies to every other instrument that you're going to use, just in a slightly different way. All right, so let's just start with that one there. And so I'm not, trying to reinvent groove here. I'm just making very, very simple rhythms. And the reason for that is because this is pretty much the rhythmic structure and backbone of every single house and techno record that exists. So cool. So we're going to do, this one is closed, right? So closed is going to be tight, and this one is open. All right. All right, so now let's just leave it like that, and let me add in each kick drum at a time, and we're going to kind of see how they change the feeling of the groove with those hi-hats, how they interact with the hi-hats, and also how the hi-hat changes the feeling of each of the grooves, right? So I'm going to do it again. Start with the long one. And what I want you to listen for is how the hi-hat groove almost feels like it's thrusting more with the longer one, which is interesting. It feels more locked in. And here, it feels like it's sticking out a little bit more. Still feels good. And now, it feels almost a little like less energetic, right? Which is an obvious reason, because I'm actually literally taking out energy from the low end, which is going to add the perception of energy. Now, the funny thing is, right, and this is what's fascinating about groove, and this is honestly the difference between a track that almost is there and a track that really is grooving, right? When we only have these two instruments, I personally think that the short kick is the grooviest by far. Like, not the most powerful, not the most aggressive, just the grooviest, right? It makes you want to move the most. But the funny thing is that once we add in the hi-hat, it kind of like feels just a little bit off somehow. And all of a sudden the long kick which had less groove now feels groovier with the hi-hat. So here's the thing that's happening, right? This hi-hat, even though it's tight, is actually lasting for a long time. Let's look at it. It's lasting for almost the length of a whole quarter note. I'm sorry, a whole eighth note. Which might not seem very long, but the thing is that since it lasts that long, that's how actually much time we are spending on that moment in the track. So the more and more elements that you put together that literally have longer releases, what you're doing is you're giving it this kind of gliding type of sensation. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's what's happening. It's a different type of feeling. Now, let's say I actually wanted to go with the short kick because I just decided this is the feeling that I like, right? Well, what I actually would do is I would shorten the hi-hat. Like that. And so what I'll do now is let's create some groups for these grooves so that we can analyze them in the most effective way. So what I'll do here is I'll make a whole groove that has this shorter hi-hat. I'm going to put this with the shorter kick. So we'll call this tight group. And then I'll take the longer one and I'll put it with the long kick. And we will call this just long groove, right? Now, I'm going to ignore the medium one for a little while just because we're going to hear the most drastic difference between these two, right? So let's first start with the tight groove. And so again, what I did here is I've taken the hi-hat to actually match the release time, in essence, of the kick drum. That feels good. That feels really good. And let's listen to how it feels extremely different than this longer one. Now that adds more energy, and so maybe down the line we want to add something like that in the track. But in terms of just immediately defining a groove, it makes a lot more sense. So let's actually take away the bass line now and just listen to the kick in the hat. Right? That makes sense. Now let's go up here to this kick in this hat. That makes sense, right? Now let's play a game. Let's take the kick from the long kick and combine it with the shorter hat. Okay, let's try that again. Now here's the funny thing. The way that rhythm functions, right, is that adding a short note probably will never sound wrong, right? What I mean by that is unless you're only talking about kick drums, right? And there are certain contexts where having a short kick drum isn't going to give you what you need. I'm talking about pretty much any other instrument, right? One of the reasons having a short sound in terms of length, decay, right, release time, is going to pretty much always sound good is because it's going to create pause, little pockets of stillness and silence between each note, right? And the thing is that it's those moments where rhythm and groove are actually created, right? So I met this funk player one time, a bass player, really legendary bass player, and like genuinely legendary, not like legendary, like, oh, he's a legend, like he's actually very famous. And he said to me, groove is everything that it ain't. Which seems like a weird philosophical thing to say. But what he actually meant was that the feeling of the groove is all the spots where you don't play a note, where you allow there to be space and silence, right? Because a very basic element of music, right? And this is true for harmony, this is true for melody, this is true for rhythm, right? And if you can actually learn this concept, this very basic notion, it applies to every single style of music and basically is the constituting factor that determines the feeling of music. A single note has no meaning until it is followed by another note, right? It's just a noise. But once you follow it up with something else, then both notes take on meaning and the first note really takes on its meaning, right? And so the thing is that if you lag more, right, in between each note versus, you get a completely different sense of feel. And especially once you start repeating it, right, it's going to change. So the thing is that with this short hi-hat, it actually almost is able to like redeem the fact that the long kick is taking away some of the groove of the low end. But obviously like this, we feel the most kind of tight to the floor sound, really groovy, right? Want to move. Now the other thing to bear in mind, and a lot of kind of new producers to electronic music, I think, fall victim to this, and I certainly myself did for a long time too, is the idea that, or not the idea, but is the issue that studio monitors are usually not going to give you low end that you want. It's hard to find a studio monitor that's going to give you the actual feeling of roundness and warmth that your kick is really going to sound like when you go and play it in like a huge club, you know, or on like a festival sound system. A kick that might sound weak and like it's not actually doing much actually might be ridiculously powerful, but your speakers just aren't representing it, right? Well, there are a couple reasons for that. So one, most speakers don't represent anything between 30 hertz or below 30 hertz, sorry. And if they do, they don't do it very cleanly, right? And then the second reason, which is honestly the more important thing, is that you just might not be sitting in the right place in your room, or your room might not just like reproduce those frequencies very well, right? So the thing with low end to keep in mind, a little kind of trick to understand what your low end is actually doing, is to walk around your room when you're listening to it and trying to figure out if it's a good kick or not, right? So a lot of the times, and this is not a joke, I'll walk to the back of the room to kind of feel what the low end feels like. And the reason that actually can work is because, just to get down to physics a little bit, I know this is a little bit boring, but this is actually a really important thing to understand about the way sound works, right? Is that a lower frequency oscillation, which is a lower frequency, right? So just low-end material in general, literally takes more space to complete a cycle. So a lot of the times what can happen is that you'll be sitting at a place in your room where A, the cycle hasn't actually completed, or B, the cycle has completed, but is also reflected and is now canceling itself out. We call this a standing wave, right? And so a lot of the times, you know, you'll be in your room and you'll be like, damn it, why would I move close to my speaker, which is where I want to listen to it? I don't hear the low end, but then I move back and all of a sudden I hear it all, right? Well, that's what's happening. And so the thing is that a good way to be able to actually gauge whether or not your low end is, quote, working or powerful is actually to listen to what it's doing to the other instruments in the track. And so the best way to figure out whether or not your low end is grooving, right, or is powerful really, is to actually listen to if it sounds like your other instruments are just pulled down a teeny little bit, like into the speaker when you turn it on. Right, so we can actually hear that the hi-hat ever so slightly feels like it retracts into the speaker when I turn on the low end. When I turn on the kick drum specifically. Now, the reason that happens, and that's a good thing, by the way, the reason that that's happening is because literally what a speaker is doing, right, the way that speaker technology works, is it's being fed a positive or negative impulse, right? So the speaker goes out and then in. So all that you're doing when you're producing music, and this is again on a very technical level, but this is, if you start thinking about it like this, not all the time, but just, like every once in a while, I'll be like, oh yeah, remember what Louis Beck said about speakers? And think about that, right? And apply it to your mix. All you're really doing is shaping the way that air is coming out of the speaker. And so the thing is that the speaker drivers on pretty much every speaker in the world, okay, what'll happen is that the more low-end energy you push out, the more air it's actually pushing out, right? And so what starts to happen is that the high-frequency drivers, right, are actually going to basically be slightly overpowered by the low-frequency driver, right? So what actually is literally happening is that the air pressure that is coming out of the low end of the speaker is so much more powerful than the high frequencies, right, that they actually are sort of fighting to get out. So one way to tell if your kick is too loud is if you feel your whole track sink every time you turn the kick on, right? One way to tell if your kick is not loud enough or not powerful enough is if nothing in your track moves at all. Now, some people would argue that that's actually the best thing that you want, but the thing is, right, is that when you're mixing dance music, when you're making a club record, you want impact, right? You want that push-pull, push-pull. So one of the benefits of having a shorter kick drum, for instance, is that every time it stops, your track is actually going to come out. Come out. It's going to push out of the speaker a little bit more. It's going to actually create natural side chaining, right? So, of course, you can create the pushing and pulling with side chain, but at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to be using side chain to try to actually create that push and pull. But the thing is that if your kick note is too long, it's just not really going to work, right? Okay, so that's kicks. Now let's move to bass. So I have this bass line right here, which is fairly short and plucky. I mean, it's not completely dead in terms of like amount of time it's flowing, but it does feel like it's floating a little bit, right? There's a nice little bit of kind of release between, a little bit of release between each of the notes. So yeah, thank you, Max. All right, so the thing that you always want to be thinking about, right, when you are making your track is, first off, do you want a tight bass line or a long bass line, right? And that's also going to seriously impact the way that you want to make your kick drum. And so I was guilty of this for a really long time. So I was like, for a long period of time, really into like that deep house movement that just like only uses sustained bass lines, just like boom, 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 boom. And so I kind of took me a long time to realize that if you use a super long on a tight long bass, we can make it happen, dude. So what I'm literally just going to do is I'm just going to change the envelope of the sound and make this last longer. And we're going to see how this starts to affect the way that the kick can be perceived. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up the release. Now it's really muddying up the low end. So I'm going to also turn up the decay on the filter. right? Big difference between those two. So just on a really basic level, let's talk about what's going on in the low end with this bass. So there's literally more time spent in the low frequencies, right? Which means, in turn, that there's actually less room for a kick. So let me show you the biggest disaster that you could try to do, is to take the long kick and combine it with the long bass. So you can hear how your kick, that low decay sound, just disappears when you put the longer bass on it. Now, if you listen to this longer bass, we have so much as right, and it's the same tone as the. So this is immediately causing a problem. Now, you could try to solve this, right, by side chaining. You could. So let's throw on a side chain and see how that functions. So I'm going to side chain from the long kick, I suppose. Yep. Okay, so this is a good question. So, Not Grauman's asking, any tips for increasing perceived loudness of a sub bass? I had the needle pinned at 0 decibels, but can barely hear it. Okay, well, a couple reasons why that is. So the problem is that you can't hear sub. Period. You can't hear it. You can only feel it. I don't mean that as in like you can't hear it, man. You can only feel it. I mean that like literally you can't hear it. The reason it's called sub is because it's subharmonic frequencies. Right? And so subharmonic means below where you can hear. So the secret to raising the kind of perceived loudness of a low end, right, is basically add more high frequencies. So there's this. Here, let me pull up this plugin from Isotope, which is the tonal balance control. So this is a measurement of, proportionally speaking, how loud low frequencies are compared to high frequencies. Now, this is in terms of measurement, not in terms of perception, right? Now, there's this whole, crazy thing going on at the moment. Well, yeah. So you can hear. Okay. So let's take a step back here. Yes, Reyes Pavlov, you can hear 35 hertz. Everyone can. You cannot hear 29 hertz. That's just a fact. It dips out of the way. What you are hearing, however, is overtones. There will be harmonic overtones. The main thing you're going to be hearing in your speakers, if you think you're actually hearing it, is the fact that it's causing the drivers to vibrate so much that it's creating distortion in the actual output of the speaker. Now, that notwithstanding, right, the thing that actually makes your sub feel more present and feel more powerful is if you highlight the overtones, right? So what I'm explaining here essentially, and this is a really important fact, and this is kind of what this whole entire exercise is about, is the more low frequencies you have in volume, the more high frequencies you're going to need to make it seem louder. I'm going to say that again. The more low frequencies you have in literal volume, in measured volume, the more high frequencies you will need to make it seem louder, okay? So what I mean by that, and this is what's kind of super weird about the way that sound works and the way that we interact with it, right? High frequencies will sound louder. What I mean by that is I can turn up the bass a lot more without it making your ears, without you making one to cover your ears, than turning up high frequencies. Just the way our ears work, right? And so, but the thing is that in terms of measurement, in terms of getting your track to be like, -6, -3 RMS or whatever it is, which is very different than -3 LUFS, right? Well, then the thing is that low frequency content will drive up the actual measurement of the volume. So like the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to mastering and mixing their own music, right, is that they'll make a track that's super low end heavy, where the highs are just not clear enough, right? And then they'll master it and they'll compress it and they'll limit it and this and that, and their meter will say, oh yeah, this is super loud. And it'll even tell them that their LUFs are louder than another track. And then they go and listen to a professional track and they go, what the fuck? Why does mine sound quieter? Well, this is kind of the balance, right? The trade-off is the more low end that you use, the less loud it's going to seem, but the more loud it's going to be, right? And so it's all about getting like a good balance, right? And so the fatter your low end is, the more you can get away with making high frequencies louder, right? And so I found a great mastering engineer recently that's been mastering a bunch of my music, because I prefer to not master my own stuff. And we were kind of discussing this point, which is that, like, the biggest thing that people are trying to figure out right now is, like, how do you make your music seem loud on Spotify, right? There's this you can find this everywhere on the internet. Yes, exactly. That's precisely correct, Nakraman. So just to draw everyone's attention to kind of picking up in the chat. So that's why saturation and distortion harmonics bring it out, although sometimes unpredictably. So yeah, basically saturation and distortion make the sub seem louder, because what you're doing is you're adding more high frequencies, or just higher frequencies, right? Usually you're just adding it at like 300 or something, 300 or 600. And that's actually just drawing your attention to it more. It's actually physically balancing it out more, right? So a great way to think about balance, no, don't necessarily want to compress it, but we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so a big way to think about balance, right, is that your speakers are designed for humans, right? That might seem like a funny, silly, ridiculous thing to say, but what I mean by that is you're the person interacting with it. It's designed for you, right? And so you want to hear it being louder, but feel it being powerful, right? So one of the greatest tricks to make your low end, for instance, less flabby is just add more high end. It's kind of weird. So if you take a kick that sounds like it's not well defined, right, and you feel like, oh, I need to put on a transient shaper or this or that, transient shapers could be a great thing to do. But what a transient shaper is anyway is it's just expanding the content in the higher areas usually, right, if you're doing that. Alternatively, right, one way to make something feel tighter is to actually reduce the sustain on the low end, and you kind of get the same result, right? But you always should think about EQ as literally a balance beam. So again, coming back to it with your speakers, right, you'll actually make it sound more balanced and less kind of like flumpy just by adding that high frequency content. Now I do want to talk about what B just said. He said just compress it. So the thing is that you don't really want to compress your low end unless you're doing it. You don't really want to compress your low end unless you're doing it because your low end isn't powerful enough. So let's be very clear about what compression does, right? It makes the distance between the loudest thing and the quietest thing smaller. So it reduces the perception of dynamics, right? Literally what a compressor does is it just basically says anything that crosses this point will be reduced in volume, right? But as a result of that, it gets pushed down closer to the low volume thing. So the reason I would caution against compressing your sub just for the sake of it, right, is because what will happen is it'll actually make it more of just a block. Now, if you're making dubstep, maybe that's what you want. But if you're making something that you want to like actually kind of like dip and dive and have a little bit more nuance, you know, and get that nice sub that kind of like dies off, you know, very warmly, well, you don't really want to compress it, because then what's going to happen is that it's just this block of and again, if you want that, then definitely do that. But you're better off actually just shelving off the low end. So this is kind of something a lot of people I think don't realize, but you'll go a lot further towards making your bass cleaner. For instance, let's take this one. If you just use a shelf as opposed to a cut. Now, sometimes you do need a cut, right? Sometimes, like, for instance, on this one, there's, like, straight up garbage down there. So, like, you would cut out stuff below, like, maybe 30. But then I would actually use a shelf to get a much better balance, and you still have a nice fat low end. And to be honest, I might even just go down to kind of 20 just to make sure all the gook is out. Anyway, so let's go back into the comments real quick. So Northern Codes, how to make more sub-bass layers. I see a lot of tracks in techno where I can see in the spectrum a lot of movement. Yeah, okay. This is, all right, I'll show you a trick that I used to use when I was making more techno. But so real quick, I just want to loop all the way back around. If you're using a really long bass like this, and you're using a long kick, right? And you're side chaining, then why did you use the longer bass? That's something to think about. It's like, why would you're literally taking away the sustain by using side chain. So instead of side chaining like that, just use the shorter kick with the longer bass. And now you can actually hear it's kind of like there's natural side chain on it. Now, yeah, you could side chain it like a little bit if you want, you know? But now you don't need to do it in such a way that it's like, you can literally just do it for the peak. So just the front of the kick just makes it through. You got it, Andrew. I'm glad. I hope it was helpful. All right, so let's real quick address the Northern Codes question. This is a great question. So getting your low end to be like action in the low end, so to speak, for in the sub region for techno, some cool tricks you can use. First off, it's important to understand that a lot of the times what you're hearing as sub, or what you're seeing as sub action, you're hearing as things as higher harmonics, right? So most actual techno motion happens, that you're perceiving is happening more from like in the hundreds area, but definitely at the, you know, at a club, the 40 to 60 you might be feeling a little bit more. So let's take a techno kick. Let's make a techno kick real quick. But actually, no, we'll make it with the short one. It's actually usually a good idea for this technique of kick production to use a short kick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take reverb. Actually, I really like, for techno kicks, the Waves IR1 for some reason sounds fucking great. So I'm going to put this on the kick. Make sure it's not clipping, because that sounds really gross on digital reverb. And then Yeah, I'm down to make some techno, man. I'm never against making techno. And then I'm gonna create a audio effect rack parallel setup where my dry kick is here, and then my reverb kick is here. So I'm gonna take. That sounds pretty nice already. Now, one of the reasons I love this EQ is because I'm sorry, this reverb is because the EQ is kind of awful on it. So we're just now adding that into the kick, right? Now, I don't like that ooh, like annoying little sound. So I'm going to go ahead and EQ that out. Actually, I just like doing that EQ in there because it allows me to get where I want to go really fast. There we go. There we go. So that's a good start for a techno kick. So yeah, if you want to get rid of the kick, the click, right? That's the beautiful thing about this is that you can just come right here. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you meant like you. There's a very like dub fiery kind of kick. And then what you could do is to make it just reinforce the strong signal. I would then duplicate this EQ. And I would basically add parallel compression. So I don't actually need that much compression. I like that though. Oh, you like it? Okay. Sorry. Well, regardless, I kind of like that now. So what I could do though is if you want to make it sound a little bit sexier, where's my fab filter? There it is. Take fab filter and just nuke the harmonics up here. That sounds pretty nice. And then if you really want to go for that, like, techno chamber sound, and I'll get to the low end motion in a second. I could create another chain, and I would take this chain and put it down here. And now what I'd do is I'd put reverb on after it, so we're getting consistency, right? And then I would only put it on the high frequencies. So now you get that big, beautiful turn, if you wanted to, could saturate. And maybe I put that in the middle. There we go. Anyway, so you can already hear the motion happening, right, in the low end in terms of that techno kick. And then one thing I would probably do is just a little bit of compression with some multi-band compression to just control the low end. And I turn the release very long. Soft knee. Yeah, so now we get, right, the click move to the front of the speaker. We need to add back a little bit of what we're losing. So let's measure it more cleanly. So we're losing about $1, so let's... So you can feel, the cool thing is it gets more powerful and more clear all at the same time, which is great. And now let's hear this. Anyway, so let's focus on getting it, that low end, that sub motion that we're looking for. Also, let's make it not clip on the way out. Also, let's turn on oversampling. There we go. Now we're sounding super sexy. All right. And then if you wanted to just really make it a spicy kick, I love using this plugin from Slate. And now all on one track, you have kick, atmosphere, and you can just automate some of that stuff out if you don't want it. So let's now make, let's pull this out of the group, so I don't need it in there. Now, one thing I also maybe would do actually would be I would take a mid-side EQ and I would EQ a little bit of 30 hertz. There we go. Now we're fucking stomping. That sounds pretty monster. All right, so the way that you, well, this is a way, right? I'm never going to tell you that this is how you do it. But one of the ways to get sub activity is to actually just take some kicks. That's a nice one. And manipulate them like this. Okay, let me see. So basically what I'm going to do is, I think this is the groove I want. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this kick and I'm going to EQ out everything from 50 hertz and below. And I'm going to definitely EQ out all the top. There we go. So if you want basically make it so it's barely audible and it just gets sucked up into that reverb. Now if you really want to make it, have some fun with it, you can transpose it up. And so, yeah. So then I would take maybe that one that I opened up. That one's higher, right? Now maybe what I would do is I put some reverb on there. The funny thing is that even though I just pulled out all this information, I can get it back in a better way if I use Saturn, right? And so for those of you who don't know what Saturn is, oh my god, I hate when it fucking does this. Ableton, you can be such a little pussy sometimes. All right, so it's a multi-band saturator, right? So I'm not really loving how it's sounding. Oh. That's why. So this will make it cut through on your laptop. This is also how you do it for hip hop. If you want it to. Now, techno purists might be like, you don't need it to cut through on a laptop. But yeah, this is how you can go about doing it. Let's see. Yeah, so it just depends on if you want that definition or not. You know, I actually don't really like it. So I might like roll the mix back. Yeah, I think it's cooler without it, to be honest. But yeah, so that's how you get that sub action. Yeah, that's a lot of reverb on the kick. So let's just go through how we did that again. So I started with a kick drum with a short release. That's super important. You want a short release, okay, because you're about to add synthetic release with reverb. So then I put on this crazy ass reverb. This reverb. In parallel. So right, so I have, let's stack these up. Dry, reverb, then more dry, which is just parallel compression to give it its front. And then, just that on top. Then I did a little bit of saturating. Oh, well, no, that's actually, well, forget about that. No, so then I did, right, very important, multiband compressed the sub area, making sure to add it back, literally just compressing 1 decibel, right? You want a fast-ish attack, but not too fast, and you want a long release so that it just smooths everything out. And then I just, right, brought everything to the front of the speakers, and then just in mid-side mode, I just boosted at 30, just to make it more crazy. And then what you do is, right, is you take this kick and you basically make it so that there's no transient definition. And why is there, I don't want this to be soloed. You add that in there. And then, right, created this kind of random reverb deep thing. So you get, it's like this, from the deep. And now, you can now you can have some fun. U.S. Capitol is under attack. That's probably too dark. Whatever, though. I gotta go in a second, but just add in another hi-hat. I mean, when in doubt. Maybe even shorten it. Yeah, that could be cool. And then, get a little of this action going. Let's go with 16th notes. Make my life easier. Just give it a little groove, Let's see. Yeah. Oh, dude, really? You're gonna delete it for me? Now I'm just having fun. So this is a problem. Now I can't stop. Techno is not allowing me to stop. It wants me to continue. So let's take a MIDI effect, put on the arpeggiator. Dude, why is it always doing this to me? It's such a dick. This is honestly one of the reasons I use Logic so much. Just only because of what just happened. Why isn't Ableton smart enough to know that I wanted to start there? Legato. disconnecting. You always bring it in too early. Oh, turn up that low end even more. I could literally do that all day. I love techno. I don't know where this thinks it is. But anyway, let's see. Who is just asking? I have to stop now because I have a recording session to go to. Little German Garce. What up, dude? Just bought live and have 0 fancy plugins. Can I follow this episode, any of those plugins? Yeah, man. So, I mean, like the main plugin that you would use. "11 kick 70s 1 is the same as 12 kick 70s. I don't get your question, King Tut. Yeah, so what you would want to do, German, is the drum bus is going to be your place. Yeah, if you can use the drum bus is a great plugin where like we could make the low end probably even more disgusting. I mean, I don't want to. I think it's super smooth, but you know, you can drive it, you can crunch it, you can transient shape a little bit, you can compress it, you can actually increase the release time. No, sorry, you can increase the decay time here of the low end and add boom. So this is kind of a one-stop shop to make some dope techno. But yeah, I mean, you know, just know how if you just manipulate the reverb, you know, and make sure you're just cutting it only using low end. That really helps. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so yeah, that's it. We got way off track because someone asked me how to make techno, and then I ended up making techno because I love techno. But I thank you everyone for tuning in. There's been a lot of you guys who came in and out of the session, and a lot of you still here. So you know, I appreciate you joining in. Again, I'm Lewis Beck. This is 343 TV. If this was your first time joining, well, first of all, welcome. But second of all, couple points of order. I hope that if it was your first time, you're going to be back. If you liked it so much that you think you're ready to hit subscribe to the 343 TV channel, please do that. If you may not be aware, but we're actually a music production school based in New York City and Berlin. And, of course, we have an online presence, and we offer classes in everything from sound design to just, you know, basic beginner Ableton and Logic. I actually teach a vocal production class as well. We got composition classes. We got everything. So one thing to bear in mind is that we are actually on Discord now. So if you want to join our Discord server, we are actually having a monthly sample challenge, which is super fun, where basically like we give you guys a bunch of samples, and whoever comes up with the sickest one gets some cool stuff. So please head over to our Discord if you want. And we're also doing a Splice giveaway, and this week's Splice giveaway will be for a 3-month Splice subscription. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure if you check in the chat, you can sign up. And, yeah, you know, thanks everyone for being here. It was great seeing you all at the top of the year. I appreciate all you guys who, you know, found this helpful. I hope to see you again next week. I forget what I'm talking about next week. I was the one who came up with the topics. Let me have a look at that. I'm pretty sure it's cool. Oh, yeah. So it's kind of going to be a continuation. I'm sort of structuring every episode so we can, you know, build upon what we learned last time. So next episode is rhythm and groove. And so basically what I'm going to be talking about is sort of an extension of what we started talking about today. It's just I'm going to be applying it to a whole track, right? Of like, how do you actually create an interesting rhythm? How do you create groove? What are the little things you should be thinking about and stuff like that? Yeah, so, you know, thanks everyone again for tuning in. A lot of awesome questions. Really appreciate everyone's participation. And, yeah, my shirt says beep fucking boop. And my girlfriend got it for me because she's super cool. All right, guys. Till next week.